BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. A Japanese expert on infectious diseases has strongly criticised the quarantine measures imposed to control the coronavirus outbreak on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Professor Kentaro Iwata, who visited the stricken vessel, said infection control on board was completely inadequate, and he had felt safer when he was tackling the Ebola epidemic in Africa.
It was completely chaotic. Some crews had a fever. They went to the medical center while wearing an N95 mask, but he didn't have any protection between his room and the medical room. I was so scared. I was so scared of getting COVID-19 because there was no way to tell where the virus is.
An additional 79 cases of COVID-19 have just been announced, bringing the total to 621. Meanwhile, the Chinese government has revoked the press credentials of 3 reporters for the Wall Street Journal over an editorial about the new coronavirus published by the American newspaper earlier this month. The Foreign Ministry said the column was racist. Here's our China correspondent, John Sudworth.
Headlined, "China is the real sick man of Asia," it argued that the outbreak of coronavirus highlights the deeper risks inherent in China's political system. In a statement, the Foreign Correspondents Club of China called the decision an unprecedented form of retaliation. In recent years, at least 6 other reporters have been effectively expelled as the authorities allowed their visas to expire, but this is the first time in more than 2 decades that those still holding valid credentials have been ordered to pack up and go.
The British government is planning to stop low-skilled and low-paid European workers coming to Britain after its departure from the EU becomes effective. It is proposing a points-based immigration system, which will only allow people with high pay and qualifications to apply for visas. Industry leaders have warned that the changes could spell disaster for the care system and hit farmers, builders and hospitality businesses hard. But ministers say companies need to move away from a reliance on cheap labour from Europe. Priti Patel is the British Home Minister.
This basically redefines our immigration policy. So the brightest and the best, people with skills need to come to the UK, and we will no longer have the routes for cheap, low-skilled labour that obviously has dominated immigration and our labour market for far too long in this country.
The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to launch a new military offensive imminently in northwestern Syria to halt the government's advance, which has displaced nearly 1 million people. Mr. Erdogan's latest warning came as talks between Turkey and Russia, which backs the Syrian government, failed to reach an agreement on how to calm the situation in Idlib. Ankara has been attempting to broker a new ceasefire with Moscow in the province. BBC News. The German government has approved plans for tighter control of online platforms to try to combat extremism. The Justice Minister said the bill would target those making threats and spreading hate, and require companies like Facebook and Twitter to remove offending content from their sites quickly. In the most serious cases, they could be required to give up users' passwords or face fines of up to €50 million. Al-Shabaab jihadists have carried out 2 separate attacks on Somali military bases in the lower Shabelle region. The militants used a vehicle laden with explosives to damage a bridge leading to the base at Kayole. An army spokesman told the French news agency the attack was repelled with the help of African Union peacekeepers. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has strongly criticised South Africa's plan to expropriate land without compensation. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said last week that plans to redistribute land would be accelerated. He said legislation making it possible to seize land would be necessary to redress a grave historical injustice. Speaking in Ethiopia on the final day of an African tour, Mike Pompeo condemned the proposal.
Even as we stand here today, South Africa is debating an amendment to permit the expropriation of private property without compensation. That would be disastrous for that economy, and most importantly for the South African people. Socialist schemes haven't economically liberated this continent's poorest people.
5 people have died after their car was set on fire in the Australian city of Brisbane. 3 children aged 6 years and under died at the scene, along with their father, Rowan Baxter, a former professional rugby player with the New Zealand Warriors. The children's mother is reported to have shouted, "He's poured petrol on me," as she escaped from the vehicle. She suffered extensive burns and later died in hospital. Police have described the incident as horrific. World News from the BBC.